Hello everyone, this video tutorial will cover the muscles of the forearm, both the anterior compartment as well as the posterior compartment. Before we begin, we have to understand that there are quite a number of muscles here, but there's a bit of a process to get us through them. We'll see that we can identify a couple of boundaries. We have brachioradialis. We would describe brachioradialis as being the most lateral muscle of the forearm, and the fact that it runs highest on the humerus is very helpful. So most lateral, highest on the humerus. And keep in mind that lateral means anatomically lateral. We understand that many of the cadavers are not in anatomical position. They're pronated. So what you have to focus on is the fact that if we can find the hand, and we'll show you the hand on the practical. If you can find the thumb specifically, you know that's anatomically lateral. You also know that the radius is anatomically lateral and it follows the thumb. And so this muscle is named appropriately. From the arm down to the radius is brachioradialis. Again, most lateral, highest on the humerus. We will use it as a landmark muscle, meaning when you walk up to a cadaver, you're either finding it as a reference or you will find the ulna. The ulna bone over here, medially, will always be visible. You can feel it on yourself. The ulna is just under the skin, or just subcutaneous. And so when we do the dissection and take skin off, you can actually see the bone nicely. The reason we find these landmarks, brachioradialis, which is highlighted, and the ulna, is they will separate flexors, generally on the anterior surface, from the extensors on the other side. That's one thing that they do. Flexors on the palm side, and you can remember that high five is flexor side, and the extensors on the opposite side. So that's one thing that the boundaries do. They separate flexors from extensors. The other thing that becomes very helpful, no matter what cadaver you're looking at in the laboratory, is it helps us find our carpes. These landmarks help us find our carpes. We can, just looking at the image, brachioradialis is now highlighted. This is a carpi, and this is a carpi. What this means for us is the first muscle next to a boundary, ulna or brachioradialis. Those are our two boundaries. The first muscle that is next to the boundary and makes it to the wrist is a carpi. So one more time, the first muscle on either side of a boundary. This is a carpi, and this is a carpi. So now we step back and we think about the three questions that have been mentioned prior. The questions are to name many of these muscles other than this one, palmaris longus. Other than palmaris longus, which goes short muscle belly, long tendon to the palm. Other than that one, every other muscle begins with the action. So when you're approaching the cadaver and you're thinking about naming these structures, naming these muscles, you too have to think about action first. And so first question is action. Your second question will be, is it a carpi? Now, we know that if this is my landmark, brachioradialis, and the other landmark would be the ulna, we know how to answer the carpi question. We know that the first muscle on either side of the boundary, here's the flexor. But on this side, first muscle next to the ulna, that's got to be a carpi. First muscle next to the brachioradialis, the highlighted muscle, has to be a carpi. So again, first question is action. Second question, is it a carpi? And then the last question is which side, if it's a carpi, because we know this will be radialis, we know this will be ulnaris. Or if it's not a carpi, you'll ask yourself, well, which digit does it affect then? Because if it goes beyond just the wrist and affects digits, the name will tell us that. So you're going to hear things like digitorum, indicis, pollicis. So again, the three questions, if you guys are following along, taking small little notes. First, find your boundaries. That's key. Find your brachioradialis. Find your ulna. Walk in the laboratory. We know that brachioradialis is always going to be thumb side, no matter what position the cadaver's in. And next, ask yourself three questions. First is action. Second, is it a carpi? And lastly, which side or which digit term will we use? So let's start naming muscles. We have this. If we were to ask the question, action, flexor. Is it a carpi? Yes, because it's the first one next to the boundary that makes it to the wrist. So we know the name has flexor carpi. Last question, which side? This muscle is flexor carpi radialis. We identify this muscle. Three questions. Action, you'll give flexor. Second question, is it a carpi? It has to be because it's immediately next to the ulna. And last question, which side? Well, if the other one was radialis, this is flexor carpi ulnaris. We have the exception already. The exception to the action question was palmaris longus. It doesn't have action as the first name. The other muscle we can see on this layer that sort of dives deep, and you have to watch out for it, is not what's highlighted, but the muscle diving deep to my landmark. So there's brachioradialis. So diving deep to that will be something called pronator teres. It doesn't have a pin right now. APR puts it on this next image. There's your pronator teres. And now, in order to find pronator teres, what's going to happen in the laboratory is you'll have to move flexor carpi out of the way a little bit, flexor carpi radialis, this muscle, move brachioradialis out of the way a little bit, and then you'll find the muscle sitting right there. That is your pronator teres. The reason it's also helpful to find pronator teres is we talk about the cubital fossa a lot. And so pronator teres, brachioradialis, and a line connecting the epicondyles gives you your cubital fossa triangle that's found throughout the outlines and referenced often. So again, pronator teres there. And even then, we can ask ourselves the questions when we name that muscle. You identify it, and your first question is action. And you got to pause a bit, because pronator only attaches to the radius. It does not make it to the wrist. It can't work at the wrist, so it can't be a flexor or an extensor. And it definitely can't be a flexor or an extensor of the digits or the fingers. Because pronator teres, as we see right here, only attaches to the radius, all it can do is pull on the radius when we want to pronate. So when you're rolling that radius over the ulna, when this muscle shortens, all it's going to do is pull the radius over the ulna. Okay, so there's your pronator teres. Again, descriptively, stick to the three questions. You find brachioradialis, you find the ulna, and identify this muscle here. You're going to say action, flexor, carpi, yes, this is the radialis. Action over here, flexor, is it a carpi? Yes. Which side? It's the ulnaris. The only one that doesn't follow the question rule right down the middle is palmaris longus. And remember, some cadavers won't have that. One individual in our laboratory, one individual cadaver, will not have this. The others will, but again, palmaris longus. And then we find a muscle in the anterior here and there, taking up a whole lot of space. Okay, ask yourself the three questions. We can pull down the layer, and that's where APR wants to label it. We know that a cadaver doesn't look like this, so they're going to want to label this muscle as flexor digitorum superficialis on this layer. In the laboratory, this is the view that we have, and so you can kind of see where that muscle is. And flexor digitorum superficialis, highlighted in purple. If we put that first layer back on like we would in the laboratory, what you'll find is here's palmaris longus. Just underneath it, on both that side and that side, you can actually see flexor digitorum superficialis. Now, first layer, again, keep a hold of those questions. Action, flexor. Is it a carpi? This one can't be a carpi because it's not immediately next to a boundary, so then you're going to say, well, which digits or digit does it go to? And this one, because it's coming down, will go to digitorum. So again, your flexor digitorum will be the name. You'll say superficialis. Why? Well, this is superficialis in purple. Deep to it would be if we remove superficialis using an APR image, now we see two more muscles. We see flexor digitorum profundus, and we see flexor pollicis longus. So one more time, flexor digitorum profundus, and the other would be flexor pollicis longus, because it's going to come down here and go to the thumb distally and help curl it up, help curl it. It's an inflection. Okay, so now off to the posterior. Again, keep the three questions in mind. Action, is it a carpi? If so, which side? If not, which digit word? So, go to the posterior. And we find our landmarks. The ulna is going to be on this side. The landmark over here nicely, which is most lateral, and we definitely see the fact that it's highest on the humerus now, is brachioradialis. So let's take a look at the muscles immediately next to the ulna. Okay, we can see the ulna there. If we identify this muscle, action, extensor. Is it a carpi? Yes, it has to be because it's the first one next to the ulna. And which side? Well, if it's next to the ulna, it's ulnaris. You just named it, extensor carpi ulnaris. Let's just work our way across. Action, it's an extensor. Is it a carpi? No, because it's not immediately next to the boundary. And therefore, which digit term will I use? Well, now I'm going to use digiti minimi. So this muscle is extensor digiti minimi. Continuing. Action. It's on the extensor side. Is it a carpi? No, it's not immediately next to a boundary. And therefore, which digit term will I use? This is extensor digitorum, because of the fact that it handles or affects all of the digits, 2, 3, 4, and 5. While we're referring to the digits specifically, let's pull down one more layer before we continue, and we can identify specifically this muscle. Action, it's an extensor. Is it a carpi? No. And which digit term will I use? This is extensor indicis, because we're going to the index or pointer finger. So again, from the top, what we've done thus far is we have identified extensor carpi ulnaris. We've identified extensor digiti minimi. We've identified extensor digitorum. And we've identified extensor indicis. Again, just using the 3 questions. Action, is it a carpi? If yes, which side? If no, which digit? So, let's continue now. We have now a couple of muscles that APR doesn't do the best job at, but we've seen them in the laboratory. This one barely highlights. It should actually go up a little farther technically. And this muscle here. Both of these we're going to treat together and say action. It's going to be extensor. It's on this side of brachioradialis. Action, extensor. Are they carpi? Yes, because they're immediately next to the boundary. And which side? These will be radialis. Now, you know what we're doing here. This is extensor carpi radialis longus, highlighted in purple. Now I'm going to highlight extensor carpi radialis brevis. And the simple rule is the longus on top of, so here's longus, on top of the brevis. There's the brevis. Okay, in the laboratory you have to watch out for the nice long tendon of longus, and deeper you'll find the brevis. So again, our landmark is brachioradialis, and then you'll come and find the carpes right next door on the extensor side. So the only thing that we have not affected, we've done extensor carpi ulnaris, we've done the extensor carpi radialis brevis and longus. We've affected the wrist in extension. This one is extensor digitorum. This would be extensor digiti minimi. What we haven't affected is the thumb. Okay, we haven't affected the thumb yet. And there will be 3 muscles that will accomplish that. Now, in the laboratory, we understand that you have this view. And we're going to give you 3 muscles to the thumb. A, B, L. Okay, one more time. A, B, L. So if we highlight the A real quick, just so we know where we're starting, there's your A right there. Okay, so if there's abductor pollicis longus, it's still right there. Okay, it's the first muscle of the outcropping that go to the thumb. This is the abductor pollicis longus, and we don't teach the brevis. And again, the acronym is ABL. A, and the second is B, the last is L. Now, if we're sticking with the 3 questions, we can still do that. Action, abductor. Now, this one causes you to think, but that's okay, largely because it's the only exception. This abductor right here is the only exception to this posterior group, aside from brachioradialis. This posterior group, it's the only exception to the extensor first name. So everything else had extensor as the first name. The only one that doesn't is abductor pollicis longus. And it's not that bad of an action to recognize, because if this muscle is to pull the thumb away from the midline, it has to be the muscle farthest from the midline, which for the hand is the middle finger. So of all the muscles going to the thumb, we said that we had A, B, L, and if we dissect down a little bit, we have A, B, L. Of all the muscles going to the pollex, this is the farthest one away from the middle finger. So in other words, it's going to be able to pull out the best, which is abduction. Spread the fingers. So we start by naming the abductor. Okay, and then we will name brevis. Now brevis, is extensor brevis, because the general rule here, these are all extensors. And this is your longus here. Let me highlight it. There it is, longus. This is your extensor pollicis longus. So once more, put it all back together. We see three muscles going to the thumb. 1, 2, and then this 3 here, which is that another longus. The ABL is helpful because this is L, there's the B, and there's the A. A tells us abductor, B tells us brevis, and L gives us the highlighted one, which is the longus. And brevis there and longus belong to the extensors. They're extensors just like the rest of them if you're asking yourself that first question, what is the action? Second question, are they carpes? Definitely not. And which digit term am I using? We're using pollicis. In review, real quick. This muscle here is extensor carpi ulnaris. This muscle here is extensor digiti minimi. Look for that 5th digit. This muscle here is extensor digitorum. Look for tendons 2 through 5. And this muscle, as well as this one, because we're going to treat them together, make sure you verify in the laboratory before taking the practical, extensor carpi radialis longus on top of the brevis. Treat them together. Notice that they are immediately next to the boundary, which is brachyradialis, most lateral, highest on the humerus. If we come down to the thumb, we know the acronym is ABL. ABL, and the most lateral will be the abductor. Abductor. Most lateral, farthest from the middle finger, is going to be abductor. You can also say it's most proximal in comparison to the rest. B, which is brevis, specifically the extensor pollicis brevis. And L, which is specifically extensor pollicis longus. And notice how the longus takes the long route over the wrist. And we finish off by finding the muscle to the index finger, extensor indicis. Now, going through APR, maybe rewatching this video tutorial would be great, but keep in mind you can name these muscles appropriately by keeping 3 questions in mind. If you ever get stuck, the 3 questions are very helpful. Often what we find is standing over a cadaver asking someone to name it, unless they've memorized the order, which becomes sometimes problematic when we twist the forearm on the test. Often when we name it, it's helpful when we run through the 3 questions. So if you could master the ability to run through the 3 questions. Action, is it a carpi, and which side or digit term, keep that in mind. And remember the carpi rule was, it's got to be the first muscle immediately next to the ulna. So we know that again, this is a carpi, or the other boundary, which is brachyradialis. We know that these are carpes there and there. Okay? And that will conclude this tutorial. Again, action, is it a carpi, which side, or digit term.